decided to call this series Decluttering Your Life because never before in human history have our lives been so overcrowded. And here's how I know that if I were to ask you, have you ever felt like life is overcrowded? Every single hand in this room would go up, right? Has your life ever been overcrowded? Of course, we all feel that tension. We all feel the crowdedness of that. I mean, we've got our work schedules and we have our family schedules and we have our kids' schedules and we have sports schedules and we've got to run errands and we've got to do bills and we've got to do all the things on the lawn care. I mean, you just name it, the list never ends. On top of that, did you know that on average, people receive and send more than 100 emails a day? The average person receives 72 texts a day. Did you know that you touch your phone almost 100 times, or you pick up your phone to do something 100 times? You actually touch your phone over 2,000 times a day. It's unbelievable. And then the kicker, on average, people spend 7 hours of screen time every single day. If you're a teenager, it jumps to 9 hours per day. I'm telling you what, our life is full and technology has been great, but it just made us busier. It's allowed us to do more in a shorter amount of time, and so our life just gets faster and faster and faster. All the while, stress and depression are at all-time highs. And so what do we do about that? I think it might be time to declutter our lives and peel some things away. Let me ask you, have you ever organized a room before in your house that was just a mess? Or just really needed it, and so you just spent all this time and energy and you get everything in that spot. It's been hours, you've been sweating, and you stand back and it's just beautiful. You know that joy that you feel in that moment? How many of you love that feeling, right? I mean, you love it. And I know some of you are parents and you're like, I've given up the idea of any hope that anything will ever be clean ever again, right? How many of you parents are there? You've just given up hope at this point? Yep, I've been there before as well. So let me ask you, how many of you live on the clean, organized side of life? Let me see your hand. How many of you live on the clean, organized side? Okay. How many of you are okay with a little clutter? Let me see your hands. Look at this honesty. I love it. Now, how many of you got married to the opposite? Let me see your hands. See, I knew it. I should have been doing a marriage series today, not declutter your life. Well, let me just show you some pictures of some messy rooms. Let me just show you this first one here. I mean, that is a messy kitchen area. And here's the deal with this picture is that our lives can be a bit like this. Show the next one if you would. You know, our lives can sometimes look at this. And I know that for some of you that land on the clean side, you're looking at this and this is just gonna ruin your whole day. You know, for others of you, you're like, what? So let's show the next one. Yeah, I mean, everything's just decluttered and messy. And I just wanna warn you, this last one, I mean, this is the grossest, filthiest. I mean, it's like, I need an advisory here, like a parental advisory. I don't even know if you wanna look. This is the worst of them all. Check this out. I mean, this is bad. This is really bad. It's disgusting. It's just disgusting. Ugh. Now, here's the deal. For some of us, we don't even realize it, that our lives actually begin to start looking like one of these messed up, cluttered rooms. And it's one thing for your room or your closet or your garage to look like that, but it's not okay for your life to look like that. It's not okay for your relationships to look like that. It's not okay for your finances to look like that. It's not okay for your schedule to look like that. But yet here we are. And over the next 4 weeks, we're gonna be talking about how we organize and clean up our life, so to speak, in these areas so that we can declutter our lives and make room for what matters most. For the things in our life that matter most to us. Because here's what I know about all of us. There's not one of us that wants to get to the end of our life and say, I just wish I would have filled up my life with more meaningless stuff. Not one of us would ever say that. And believe it or not, God has something to say about this. And it's so practical and so helpful that even if you aren't a Jesus follower here today, I'm telling you, or watching online, I'm telling you, these are some things that you can begin to apply to your life to make space for what matters most. Because we need to declutter. I mean, decluttering our lives means that we aren't driving 100 miles an hour everywhere we go because we're so behind, right? There's no margin in our schedule. Decluttering means that you actually have time to talk to the people that you're doing life with, that you're investing in those relationships around you. Decluttering means that you actually have some money left over at the end of the month, so you aren't living so stressed out financially. Decluttering means that you can actually enjoy what you're doing maybe on your day off without feeling guilt and stress about all the things that are left to do. Decluttering means that you can come to church and actually focus and learn something without thinking through your mind your to-do list of what's happening later on. Or you're able to pray and read the Bible without distraction because your life has made space for those things. Because I think that we would all agree with this, that life is so much better with space. Life is so much better with space. And so here's how we're gonna define decluttering for the next 4 weeks, all right? As we unpack this, today I'm just gonna set it all up and then we're really gonna deep dive over the next few weeks. And so if you're taking notes, this would be your first fill-in on your notes. Declutter, and this is how we're defining it, the space between our current pace and our limits. Our current pace and our limits, the space between these two things. And all of us already know this, is that we all have limits. You have limits. And even though some of you have extraordinary capacity, at some point you won't be able to fit anything else into your life. And when your life becomes that cluttered, like one of those images that we saw, you know what happens? We actually stop enjoying life. Because every part, relationally, financially, work, schedules, whatever it is, everything feels like a pressure point. And we aren't enjoying life. We actually begin to lose control. And so when we don't take time to bring space into our lives, a few things will happen, and this is your next fill-in. When we don't take the time to bring space into our lives, here's what's happened. See if you can identify. The first thing is this, is that stress levels go up. Stress levels go way up, right? I'm so stressed out. I'm not here on time. I'm watching those minutes, right? I'm stuck in traffic. I'm feeling all this pressure. I've got to cram and get that assignment in, right? I've got to get this project for work done. Press, and the stress just builds and builds and builds. The next thing that happens is that our focus narrows. And our focus tends to narrow onto the one area of our life where there's no space, and we begin to lose sight of everything else. Right, for instance, the closer I get to the front of this stage, the less I can really focus on what I'm supposed to say and do because I'm so worried that what if I fall over the edge? And that's what happens when you don't make space. You become so hyper-focused on that area where your life's a mess that you don't have space and freedom to deal with everything else. The third thing that happens, and maybe you've experienced this, is that relationships suffer. Right? When your life is a mess in these different areas, relationships begin to suffer. Right? Mom, you're always on the phone. Dad, you're always on the computer. Gosh, I don't even want to come home. This environment's so stressful. I don't want to talk about our schedule. I don't want to talk about our calendar. I don't want to talk about money. And on it goes. And if I'm honest, this isn't a religious thing or a Christian thing. This is just a life thing. And every one of us feel these kinds of pressures. And when we don't have space, when our life looks a little messy, there's more stress, our focus narrows, and our relationships suffer. So here's the question that we need to ask. Why do we do this? Why do we live in such a way where the needle's in the red? Why do we do this? Because nobody's saying, I want more stress. Nobody's saying, I want more arguments. I want less focus. Right? I don't want to answer when my husband calls. I want my dog running for cover, right? I don't want my kids to cringe when the garage door opens. I mean, none of us would say that we want any of those things. So why do we do this? And for some of us, we might say, well, it's a season of life. And that might be true. Or some of you would say it's a lack of discipline, and that could be part of it. But I really think that there's something bigger that is underlying all of it. And if we would pay attention to this and we'd begin to apply this, it could actually set the stage to declutter every other area of our life. And so here's the reason that I would like to suggest that we keep our life cluttered. It's your next fill-in. Why do we cram as much into life as possible? It really boils down to fear. It boils down to fear. If I were to ask you, why don't you stop doing that? Or why don't you start doing that? Or why don't you make space in this area or make space in this area of your life? Some of you might even begin with, well, Ryan, if I stop that, I'm afraid that. Or Ryan, if I start that, I'm afraid that. Well, if I tell them that I can't, I'm afraid that. Or if I tell my kids that they can't, I'm afraid that, and you fill in the blank. And none of us want to admit it, but it's really fear that drives us to live a life that is packed to the gills. We have a fear of missing out. FOMO is what they call it, don't they? The fear of missing out, that other people are experiencing something and I'm not there. Or the fear of falling behind. Well, falling behind who? And falling behind what? Right? It's a fear in our lives of not mattering. That when I get to the end of my life, I want my life to have accomplished something and done something. And so we equate busyness and spending and calendaring ourselves to death with having a full life. Right? We mistake all of our busyness and all of the spending and all of the max, living life to the max. I mean, we feel like that means that you have a full life, and it doesn't. It means you have a chaotic life. A life void of space and a life void of peace. And all of us want that. And this is what we're going to talk about throughout this series, because it's so true, your next fill-in. That our fear of not mattering much has the potential to draw us away from what matters most. Our fear of not mattering much has the potential to draw us away from what matters most. And life is strange in this way that we don't get any do-overs, do we? Once your 20s are gone, they're gone. Once your 30s are gone, they're gone. Once your 40s are gone, you're gone. And I'm making some of you nervous now. Once your 50s are gone, they're gone. They're gone. There's no do-overs. And so the question for today is this, your next fill-in. What are you going to do to get the most out of life? Not the most things out of life, but the things that matter most out of life. How are you going to get those things in your life? Because if we get this wrong, all we are left with is regret. That's it. That's what we're left with. We're left with regret in our finances. We're left in regret in relationships. We're left in regret at work and on our schedules. We're left with regret. And here's why this is such a great week to be watching online or here in person, even if you're not a church person. That when you open the pages of the Bible, God actually speaks to this issue in a very unusual way. No, the word declutter is not in the Bible, if that's what you were hoping for. Declutter is not there. But God gives us this theme of fear versus faith over and over and over again. And what we discover with this issue of decluttering to make space is really a trust issue. That's what it boils down to, is a trust issue. Now, if you remember back in the 90s, I believe that this was one of the greatest animated films of all time, The Prince of Egypt. How many of you have ever seen this movie before? The Prince of Egypt. It's one of the best films. And so this afternoon, you can go home and watch it. That's your movie for tonight. That's your assignment, watch Prince of Egypt. But this story is all about Moses delivering the Israelites, right, from Pharaoh, from the oppression. And the Israelites, all they knew was slavery. That was their whole entire life. It's all they had ever done. None of them knew what freedom looked like. There were no vacations. There were no sick days. There was no maternity leave. You were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they knew nothing else. And we can't even wrap our minds around that because that concept would be so foreign to us. And so when God delivered the people of Israel through Moses, right, and led them into this new land, he had to give them new rules because all they had ever known was slave rules. It's all they knew. And the cool thing is that one of God's rules that he gave them was around this idea of making space. God said something like this: hey, one of my top rules for you is that you shall taketh a dayeth offeth. Yeah, that was one of his rules. In fact, we find this in Exodus 20, verses 1, 8 through 10. And it says this: and God spoke all these words, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In other words, no work. That's how he defines it. Next verse, he says, on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male, nor your female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. God says, I know this is so hard for you to comprehend because this isn't all you know, but I'm asking you to take a break to bring space into your life. So why would God do that? Because come on, I mean, if you lived thousands of years ago, you weren't stocking up on groceries for a month. If you didn't work that day, you weren't eating that day. If you didn't purify water that day, you weren't drinking that day. Everything was hand to mouth every single day. So why would God say, go ahead, just take a day off. I want you to rest. I want you to make space for what matters most. Why did he give them a day off? Your next fill-in? So that they would begin to trust God. So that they would begin to trust God. I mean, God, if we take a day off, what are we gonna eat? I want you to trust me. But God, what if all the work doesn't get done? No, I want you to trust me. I mean, what if we don't purify the water? No, I want you to trust me. But God, you see my kids and they need, no, I just want you to trust me. That it's not all dependent on you. I want you to begin to depend on me. I want you to depend on me. And then Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, wrote about how we can get the most out of life with this same idea. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, we begin in verse 1, and he says this: there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. And now he's about to describe some of the seasons of life that we all go through. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. I mean, it's describing all of the different seasons and burdens in our life, but meant to be in balance. And he finishes this thought with this verse. What do the workers gain from their toil, right? As you go through life and experience all of these seasons, what do you gain? I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live. That each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all of their toil. This is the gift of God. Solomon says, God is gifting you the things that matter most in life. The peace and fulfillment. Even Jesus said, I came to give you life and life to the fullest. This is what Solomon is talking about. That for all of your working and striving, there'd be a part of your life that matters more. And those would be the things you enjoy. So he says this is the gift of God, and then he ends with, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. So that people will fear him. Now, growing up for you, I don't know if you went to church, or I don't know what your idea of religion looked like growing up, but for some of you, when you hear the words fear God, you see him in heaven with like a sledgehammer just kind of waiting for you, right? Like whack-a-mole, right? Just, you step out of line, boom, or God's angry, he's gonna hit you. No, but that's not what he's talking about. It's not being afraid of God. Your next fill-in, fear of God means to have a reverence for him and his plan. It's a reverence for him and his plan that says, God, I'm afraid to do it any other way but your way. God, I believe that your way is the best way. And Solomon is saying, if you want to get the most out of life, if you want to understand how to find satisfaction and to do good and be happy, that it begins with trusting God's plan and doing it his way. That instead of fearing God, we fear on what we might miss out on, right? We fear not doing it God's way. I mean, imagine what would begin to happen in our lives if we began to pray this. God, I trust that your way and your plan's the best way. And so when it comes to relationships and finances and kids and schedules and work and all the things that my life seems so cluttered with, I'm gonna start doing it your way. And if I do it your way, just like the Israelites, it's gonna make space for the things that matter most in my life. And so God, I'm gonna trust you. I'm gonna trust you to do it your way. I mean, if you begin to say that, what would happen to all the fear mongering, right? The fear of missing out, the fear of failing, the fear of not being enough or falling behind. What would happen to all that? You see your next fill-in, when you trust God, you will stop trading your peace for progress. When you just begin to trust God, that it's not all up to you. And over the next few weeks, we're gonna talk about how we can do this and how we can make space in real practical ways. But it says, God, I trust you to fill in the gaps. I trust you to take care of it all. It's not all up to me. Because here's what I know about all of us, is that something or someone will determine the limits you're gonna live by. Something or someone is gonna determine the limits in which you live by. Why not let it be you? Why not let it be you? You will either let culture and fear drive you to your limits, your next fill-in, or you will choose to trust God to take care of what you can't. And there's a beautiful tension in this spot of saying, God, I want to do all I can. I want to do my part without sacrificing what means most to me. And I'm gonna trust you, because when I live at my limits and I'm redlining all the time, I just don't enjoy life. My stress goes up, right? Everything, my focus narrows. Gosh, I'm just not enjoying it. I want to declutter my life so I can have space to enjoy the most important things. And if I'm being honest, as a pastor, I'm used to receiving crisis phone calls. No one ever calls me to tell me that they're doing good. Right? No one says, hey, just calling to check in, just want to tell you I'm doing good today. All right, thanks. Typically they call because there's a crisis at hand. Right? For the man who didn't have time to invest in his marriage until his wife was walking out. And suddenly he wishes that he had spent all the hours and the time investing in his marriage instead of trying to save it. And he'd say, I wish I could go back. I wish my life wouldn't have been so cluttered, so I could have focused on what mattered most in my life. Right? It's moms and dads who are so busy at work, so busy chasing the dream, so busy with their own hobbies and their own life that they didn't invest in relationship with their kids. And now their kids are getting older and the wheels are beginning to fall off their lives. And now mom and dad are spending all of their time and all their money and energy trying to solve all of the crises in their kids' lives because their schedule looked like one of those messy closets growing up. And they wish they could go back and make the investment on the front end to recognize that that was way more important than their career, way more important than making money, way more important than pursuing a hobby. If I could go back and invest in my kids, I would do it. And what's interesting for people 60 and older, here's what they would tell you. That if I could go back to my 30s and my 40s, I would gladly give up some progress and prosperity for the sake of more peace. I would gladly give up some of that for more peace. And they would tell you to create more space in your life for the things that matter most by trusting God and not giving in to fear. The fear of falling behind, the fear of not measuring up, the fear of not mattering. And the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about how we do this. And so here's your homework as we close today. And you have to circle one of these, either mentally or on your notes, but go ahead and put that up. Where do I need the most space in my life? If you were to answer honestly, where do you need the most space? Is it in your schedule? Is it in relationship? At work or in your finances? And if you're having trouble clarifying this, what would your spouse say that you should circle? What would your best friend say that you should circle? Or those closest to you? And over the next several weeks, this is what we're going to unpack. How do we practically create space in our lives for all these things? But it all begins with this idea of trusting God over my own fears. Psalm 56, 3 and 4 says, when I am afraid, when I'm afraid of falling behind, when I'm afraid of not making enough, when I'm afraid of not measuring up, when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I will not be afraid. God, I'm gonna trust you to do all the things that I can. See if you do that and let God into that space. You will begin to see your life change in these areas as we learn to trust him and not ourselves. So would you mind closing your eyes as we get ready to pray? And even if you're watching online, would you mind closing your eyes? And there's nothing spiritual about closing your eyes. It just helps us focus right here in this moment. And so what I would love to do is just take the next 30 seconds just between you and God. The next 30 seconds between you and God, just to ask this question: God, how am I doing at trusting you for everything? How am I doing at trusting you? We believe here that God can speak to our hearts. And so we're gonna take a moment just to listen, and then we'll respond. So 30 seconds between you and God. Let's do that right now. And maybe you're here today and you haven't taken that first step of trust to surrender your life to Jesus, to ask his forgiveness for your sin, to receive his love for your life, to give you a brand new start, to begin following him. It's the ultimate act of humility, the ultimate act of trust that admits, God, I can't do this on my own. I need you. And if you're here today and you're ready to make that step, I want to lead you in a simple prayer. And I'm going to invite you to just repeat this silently where you are and mean this with your heart. Say, dear Jesus, I acknowledge my need for you today. And I'm sorry for my sin and all my mistakes. And I ask you to forgive me and give me a brand new start. I believe that you are the Son of God, that you died and rose again. And I'm asking you to be the leader of my life from this day forward. In Jesus' name. So Heavenly Father, we're grateful for all of us and the way that you're inviting us into this new trust journey with you to make space in our life for what matters most. And I pray, God, that you would help us to do just that, to let go of all the fears, to begin to let go of things, to declutter our life. And over the next several weeks, would you speak to our hearts? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.